question is, it doesn't include a lot while it has these general statements, and this is very common of ChatGPT work. It has general statements that usually are not wrong. They tend to have very little pertinent detail. In other words, we know what ChatGPT knows, but if ChatGPT knows, but it's not clear to me always that ChatGPT knows why it knows what it knows. So essentially, in your answer, what did it get right? It get this right, and we know that that is right because. That's what I'm looking from you. Or it got this wrong, and we know that because there is this data that was discussed in Article X or in Lecture Y, and it seems to indicate that is indeed supported or not supported, as the case may be. So there is no such the one thing I want you to understand is there is no such a thing as we're dealing with archaeological data. Archaeological data, as I have said a number of times in this class, is always somewhat subjective. Theoretically, if you do it right, all you can say at this point is what the data may mean on the basis of the data we have available on the basis of X, Y, Z explicit models and the body of data we have available at this point. If the body of data were to change, then presumably that would change as well. So what I want you, the interpretation of the data may have to change as well. So what I want you to tell me is, on the basis of the data we now have, please evaluate those statements that ChatGPT is making. And tell me what data that is pertinent to it, the statement itself did not address and that you would like to address. Now, there are 6 entries. You can address them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's a efficient but rather inelegant way of doing it. Or you can just simply start dividing your essay into questions. ChatGPT makes a number of assertions, including X, Y, Z, whatever. These assertions are correct for the following reasons, and so on. Left unexplained in ChatGPT's essay is the impact of X, Y, Z factors, which we know to have been important for the following reasons, or something along those lines. I happen to think that the latter would be a much more elegant way of constructing an essay on this subject. However, if you want to address it systematically, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then tell me what it got wrong, what it got, assertion 1, what it got right, what it got wrong, and why, then that's okay too. But as I said, a lot less elegant. Are there any questions about what we are asking of you? In general, I will tell you in advance that mostly what ChatGPT says is correct. But mostly, I see little evidence in the essay itself that it knows why those statements are correct. And I want to see evidence that you know why those statements are correct. But if you think they're incorrect, that's cool too. Tell me why. So the issue here is in the why. This is what you need to absolutely emphasize. Questions? Okay, so let me start with today's class. In the last class, we started speaking about the work of Richard Klein. And what is new, and I read you that quote from his book, The Dawn of Human Culture. What is new to Klein's argument is not a claim of cognitive superiority of Homo sapiens sapiens over the Neanderthals, but what is new is that while this claim had been made for 100 years, nobody had said exactly what the mechanism was. Not that Mr. Klein says exactly what the mechanism is. You have to read between the lines. Clearly, he talks about a biological mutation that affects cognition, but he never quite tells us what that mutation is. In fact, if you read the article in the readings, he never quite tells you what the mutation is. If you listen, the article was written in 2008. If you listen to his lecture, the link is in the syllabus. that he gave at one of the California State colleges in 2011. There, he does tell you what exactly he thinks the mutation is. It's a cognitive mutation, possibly related to a particular gene, FOXP2 gene, related to the ability to articulate a complex language. One of the many potential genes. I'm not claiming that this is the one gene that affects, it's been called the language gene many times, but I'm not claiming that it is. It is one of a number of genes that affects language. What is clear, and we know this from a medical study that was done of a particular family in Turkey, in which half of the descendants have problem articulating language. In each one of those cases, when they were compared to their siblings that had no problem articulating language, it was found that they had a defective FOXP2 gene, and that defect alone was enough to prevent them from the articulation of language. Cognitively, they were just fine. They just simply did not have the ability to properly articulate language and make themselves understood in a verbal way. So a mutation has occurred, he tells us, and that mutation occurs by 50,000 years ago. No idea where this came from. By 50,000 years ago. And once it took place, it proved so adaptive, he tells us, that essentially those, the group of Homo sapiens sapiens, somewhere in Africa, that bore it, essentially the mutation was so adaptive that that group outcompeted everybody else and eventually went on to colonize the world. Why 50,000? So essentially, there are two main points to what Klein is telling us. Number one, that there is three main points. There is indeed, as we had long suspected, a cognitive difference between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens sapiens, or at least he thus believes. It is. If you ask me to put my hand on fire, is this indeed the case? Can you demonstrate this? I will explain a little bit later why I don't think, well, I do believe that it is likely correct. I don't think that we can say without a shadow of a doubt that we can demonstrate it. There is indeed, he would argue, a cognitive difference. That cognitive difference had affected the ability of humans to produce complex language by means of articulation. It proved thoroughly adaptive, and it was a punctuated phenomenon that took place about 50,000 years ago, and it spread itself very quickly. So that essentially is what Klein is telling us. Do you understand what I mean by a punctuated phenomenon? What does he mean when he calls it a punctuated phenomenon? Something punctuated is abrupt. It happens very quickly. The reference here is to an article written in 1972 by Stephen Jay Gould and Niles Eldredge about what they call punctuated evolution. Darwin, of course, the notion of biological evolution can be traced back to the work of Charles Darwin back to the 19th century. It is very clear that Darwin thought that evolution proceeded by adaptation, and it was a slow, gradual process. So essentially, if you were to put a graph, biological evolution, along the lines of Darwinian theory, it would be a very slowly ascending line. However, Eldredge and Gould looked at, they were, of course, armed with a much broader knowledge of the fossil record than was available to Darwin. And essentially, their conclusion was that while indeed there was a slight progression in the increasing complexity of biological evolution through time, over long periods of time, that increase was very, very slight indeed, and long periods of time could be characterized as largely static, and that there was a pattern of dramatic change at particular periods of time. So that the evolution, the biological evolution would not be a gradual line slowly increasing, but it would be a line that increases dramatically, remains more or less static, increases dramatically, remains more or less static, and so on. That evolution can be, in many cases, a punctuated phenomenon. So in a sense, when he says that the evolution of Homo sapiens, the cognitive evolution of the evolution of cognitively modern Homo sapiens sapiens is a punctuated phenomenon, he is referring back to the work of Gould and Eldridge. So essentially, it appears 50,000 years ago, is what he's saying. The question then becomes, is it indeed that punctuated? There's many questions. Is it indeed the case that the Neanderthals were so much dumber than we are? And that is indeed a question. And I'll address that by looking at some features of Neanderthal biology that appear to be not all that dissimilar from those of a Homo sapiens sapiens biology. And in particular, features that have to do with language or the ability to speak. There's a number of questions. Are there cognitive differences? And do these cognitive differences obey some sort of a mutation? And does this mutation take place in one big punctuated element at 50,000 years ago? So the question then, of course, is why does he think it was 50,000 years ago? And the answer to that question boils down to what happens in Europe. Literally, the fluorescence of art in the Upper Paleolithic period in Europe, which in Europe is indeed tied to the entrance of Homo sapiens sapiens into the area sometime around 45,000 years ago, 40,000 years ago, give or take. And there is this fluorescence of the arts in Europe that has absolutely captivated humanity ever since that art was first found. It was further identified in the last quarter of the 19th century AD. And most of this art is represented by cave paintings in the so-called Franco-Cantabrian region of Europe, which is essentially boils down to the southern parts of France and the northern parts of Spain. I'm giving you here an illustration. Let me get my laser pointer out. An illustration of Lascaux Cave, which was found in the 1920s in France and is perhaps one of the best known of these painted Paleolithic caves. And you see the entrance to the cave here and all of the different areas of the cave that have been painted. And you see a representation of the paintings on this cave here. What is very clear and what has been known ever since the cave was found in the 1920s is that you have a plethora of animals representing the animal life that existed at the time. The Lascaux Cave is usually dated to about 20,000 years before present. A plethora of animals that existed in the fairly cold tundras of southern Europe at the time. And something that is very clear here is that the cave is being reused over many generations. You have animals and sequences of animals painted on top of other sequences of animals painted on top of other sequences of animals. So there's many attempts at some sort of a narration in visual form of a phenomenon that is being perceived through the minds of the painters. Let me make this so I can actually talk to you while looking at the slides. Let me get my handy-dandy instrument. Allow me to do that. Yes. Okay. So, the first cave to be discovered, if I recall correctly, is Altamira Cave in Spain in 1879. The caves have continued to be discovered even today. The Chauvet cave was discovered, one of the most spectacular ones, maybe 12, 15 years ago. Remember reading in the newspaper a couple of new caves discovered in France a few years ago. So thus far we have 200-something caves and counting. And all of these caves, insofar as they can be dated, and usually the pigments in which the caves can be dated, the paintings can be dated directly, because the pigments are made with organic materials and are amenable to C14 radiocarbon dating. So all of these 200-something caves, until very recently, have all dated very clearly to the period of that corresponds to the entry of Homo. The earliest, Chauvet, for instance, one of the very earliest is 35 to 40,000 years ago. Some of the very latest date to 20,000, 18,000 years ago. But they all correlate with the entrance of Homo sapiens sapiens in Europe. And that has been received wisdom until recently. And I say until recently because recently all sorts of things have started to happen. I call them anomalies in our understanding of Upper Paleolithic art. And this is the Cueva de los Ardales that has some sort of abstract paintings in them, these dots that you see there. They have used the natural coloring of the rock and added these dots. The question is, what do the dots mean? Remember the dots. I'm going to come back to the meaning of the potential meaning of these dots. What is remarkable about the Cueva de los Ardales, when people first found this, and we're discussing a find in the last 5 years, give or take, they thought, oh yes, yet another a painted cave in northern Spain. You've seen one, you've seen them all. This one is quite different because the radiocarbon dates came down to 64,000 or so BP, plus or minus several thousand years. What is remarkable, of course, is that at this date, there were no Homo sapiens sapiens in Europe. So either our understanding of the entrance of Homo sapiens sapiens in Europe is flawed, and there were a number of waves of Homo sapiens sapiens in Europe, early ones that produced this. If indeed a correlation of art and the cognitively modern Homo sapiens sapiens art is to stand, then there are two potential interpretations for this. One interpretation is that there was an earlier wave of Homo sapiens sapiens in Europe that produced this, and that explains the date. The other interpretation, of course, is that the date is wrong. In fact, quite a number of Paleolithic specialists have now argued in print that the date is wrong. The question is entirely open. We simply do not know. There are other caves that also appear painted. The Cueva nearby, all of these are near each other. This is the Cueva de los Ardales cave, and what you see there is a stencil of a hand produced by putting paint into your mouth, putting your hand there and blowing on it. And that, of course, is something that we see very often in quote-unquote standard Upper Paleolithic painting. This one also produced comparable radiocarbon dates. Either the labs that produced, they were both run in the same labs, either the labs produced the same mistakes that produced these very early dates consistently, or we have a phenomenon that is simply thus far unrepresented in the archaeology of the Upper Paleolithic period in Europe. The question, the answer, we simply do not know. Yet another one of these caves, it's a complex of caves in the Atapuerca region. And notice, incidentally, how simple the painted motifs are compared to something like Lascaux. Of course, Lascaux presumably is something in the order of 40,000 years later than this. So, is this an earlier wave of Homo sapiens sapiens, or is this evidence of the existence of Neanderthal art? And if it is evidence of the existence of Neanderthal art, as Mr. Silhau at the excavator claims, then what does that tell us about? Because when a client talks about how unique the modern cognitively modern Homo sapiens sapiens mind is, he points at art as the evidence of it. So if indeed this is where to be determined to be Neanderthal art, this would entirely change our conceptualization of the cognitive capabilities of Neanderthals. There are other anomalies that have come to light. 10 years ago, talking about this was very simple. There is a Paleolithic painting. It's in Europe. It's in Europe. It associates with the entrance of Homo sapiens sapiens. Case is close. Correlation is absolute. These days, as I said, there's this stuff in Europe that may be earlier, and then there is stuff that is not in Europe, suggesting that if indeed there is something unique about the modern Homo sapiens sapiens mind at about 50,000 years ago, it's not a phenomenon that is restricted to Europe, but it is a worldwide phenomenon. And I'm talking about Sulawesi Cave in Indonesia, which has been, when initially found, was dated to 45,000 to 40,000 years ago. Latest radiocarbon dates, a redoing of the radiocarbon dates, are bringing them earlier to as early as 51,000 plus or minus 3,000 years, suggesting that these paintings are actually earlier than anything associated with Homo sapiens sapiens paintings in cave paintings in Europe. And you see the state of some of the paintings badly eroded, but some of them are fairly clear, like this apparent porcupine or goat of some sort. Many of these hand stencils right there that we have seen before. This, what appears to be some sort of a bos primigenius, the wild ancestor of cows, and more importantly, human figures surrounding it. And this is interesting because there is, in Europe as well, there is an association with scenes that appear to depict hunting and the wild animals that are depicted in the European caves. Again, from Sulawesi caves, some of these hand stencils, and to compare, these are hand stencils from Lascaux Cave in France much later. So, to summarize, the nice, neat picture that we had of the absolute correlation between Homo sapiens sapiens, cognitively modern Homo sapiens sapiens, and the flourishing of art in Europe at about 50,000 years ago is starting to look increasingly shaky. And I will give you a lot less clear evidence later on from Africa as to the same issue. But leaving the anomalies aside, let's talk a little bit about what the standard picture of Paleolithic cave art it looks like. And again, this is best documented in Europe, but now it's not all solely documented in Europe. Chauvet Cave, dated to about 35,000 years ago, found relatively recently, with absolutely dramatic paintings, generally associated by genre, different species illustrated separately, felines, horses, etc. Lascaux Cave, of course, well known. Some of the sequences at Lascaux, Bos primigenius, a wild horse, and here this particular scene, quite famous in the central area of the cave, illustrating the phenomenon that I described earlier. These paintings are a palimpsest in which one painting gets put first and another painting gets added later and so on. But what is interesting is, and so this bull was earlier, that horse is later. However, the horse was, in some cases, the later paintings actually, to some degree, obscure some of the earlier paintings, but in other cases, they are made to respect the boundaries of the earlier paintings. In other words, the people kept on coming and kept on coming and painting and kept on coming and to some degree respecting the earlier paintings, suggesting some sort of a continuity of meaning, a continuity of culture, of whatever it is that is happening at the time these paintings are produced. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But to give you an impression, again, Lascaux Cave is probably the best known of them all. And what I want to bring to, and you have things like mammoth, Bos primigenius, wild horses, and so on. In many cases, you have, and again, this phenomenon that the paintings are palimpsest, paintings going in that direction, paintings going in this direction that respected the others, suggesting that the painters were aware of the work of those that had come before them, and suggesting that there was some sort of a cultural connection between them. Many of the paintings have associated with them things that look like arrowheads or atlatl darts. You get felines, you get a bison, horses in this case, very clearly with atlatl darts nearby. This has given rise to quite a number of speculations when the meaning of the interpretations about the meanings of these paintings have varied over the decades. When they first discovered in the last quarter of the 19th century, they were thought to be art for the sake of, when they first discovered, in fact, they were thought to be modern. Eventually, as more and more of these caves were discovered, in some cases caves that had been sealed in antiquity, as more and more of these caves were discovered, it became clear. The dating wasn't very clear. The dating only became somewhat clear after the beginnings of radiocarbon dating. Radiocarbon dating was not invented until 1955. But in any event, it's by the early part of the 20th century, it became clear that these were very, very early paintings indeed. But the meaning of the paintings varied considerably. When they were first discovered, and the realization was made that these were very early paintings, the general conceptualization of art, this is the time of the Impressionists in Europe and so on, was that artists worked for the sake of art. So this was presumed to be the actions of Paleolithic artists representing the world around them for the sake of representing them, because this is what humans do. They express the world around them. Starting at the beginning of the 20th century, there was an art historian who was also a bit of an anthropologist, a man by the name of Salomon Reinach, who studied the Arunta peoples, which are a hunting and gathering nomadic population organized at the band level in what is today Australia. And when he studied the Arunta, he noticed that in many cases, before they went out on the hunt, they would gather at rock shelters and paint animals. And in this case, we're talking with populations that were ethnographically attested. So Reinach had been to Australia and investigated the issue. Why do you paint animals? And it turned out that he was told that by painting the animals, they were making it more certain that once they went out into the real world, they would actually encounter the animals and indeed kill them. So the idea, he published this book, L'Art et la Magie, Art and Magic, in 1901. Apparently nobody read him. This is what happens to people who are way ahead of their time and that cross-cut fields. Nobody pays attention in the fields in question, so nobody read him. But in a sense, he already in 1901 suggested that these paintings were a form of an attempt to propitiate a good hunt, a type of magic invocation, so to say. This became the standard explanation for these paintings in the 1940s. But in a sense, it was already said at the very beginning of the 20th century, and nobody listened to Mr. Reinach. So something in the order of 15–20% of these figures appear in direct association with weapons. So the assumption that the figures are part of a narrative that has to do with the humans hunting them is not illogical. That, however, leaves the other 80% that do not appear in association with weapons. Margaret Conkey from the University of California at Berkeley wrote a very important article trying to explain Paleolithic cave painting in the 1960s, if I recall correctly, in which she noticed that the images were in many cases a palimpsest. Palimpsest is essentially something that exists and something that is added to it, and then something is added to it, and something is added to it. So the images were a palimpsest of images, and she suggested that this is the sort of thing that you would expect if the images were painted in the performance of some sort of ceremonies or rituals. And she and others suggested that when you are actually, if you're they looked at the archaeological record and the ethnographic record of the presumption is that these were paintings executed during the course of ritual by hunting and gathering nomadic bands. So they looked at when is ritual performed and what sorts of rituals are performed by ethnographically attested hunting and gathering bands. And the answer was rituals that have to do with ceremonies celebrating the arrival of adulthood, which tend to be public rituals, or rituals concerning ceremonies having to do with marriage. And of course, marriage is a very important activity in hunting and gathering bands. Hunting and gathering bands, by definition, are single extended families, and they have this gigantic problem of avoiding incest. And the only way that incest is to be avoided is to either parcel out the males away or the females away to a related band in the same general territory. And in almost all, but not all ethnographic cases, but in almost all, it is the females that get parceled away. But avoiding incest is very important for hunting and gathering bands, and this generally gets done in public ceremonies, usually correlating with particular seasons. So Conkey talks about seasonal aggregation for the purposes of public ceremonies of regional hunting and gathering bands exploring a particular region, congregating at particular places where ceremonies would have taken place, ceremonies of initiation into adulthood, ceremonies of exchange of mostly females between bands in order to avoid incest. This would have been a very important social occurrence, and she suggests that these sorts of whatever rituals are being embedded are part of these seasonal ceremonies that take place over many, many, many generations, explaining the palimpsest of figures, which is a perfectly logical explanation. Again, you see the palimpsest, some of the earlier images there, some of the later images there, some of the even later images there. There's a certain stratigraphy to this art. It's very clear that these caves were reused over many, 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 many generations. Something else that is important is that when you actually, I keep on talking about Upper Paleolithic occupations in Europe in cave this or cave that. People would tend to think that just means that the people in this period lived only in caves. That is absolutely not the case. Caves were probably a refuge in the colder months. Most of the time, they roamed around the countryside, leaving very, very ephemeral traces that have mostly been destroyed in landscapes such as Europe that has been plowed and fought over for many millennia. So that in the end, caves, because they have better preservation, preserve most of what we know about those populations. That doesn't mean that they were cave-dwelling populations year-round. They were not. More likely than not, caves were only refuge for the colder, harsher months. But they do provide the overwhelming majority of the data we have. We have, as I said, 200-something caves, thousands upon thousands of individual images. The relative proportion of those images that are not animals is minute. Only a very small number of images can be said to not represent animals. One of those images is a number of the images that are not animals, incidentally, come from one cave, although there are images that are not animals from a number of caves, but the large majority come from this particular cave, Trois Frères, three brothers. And we're looking at this image here, which is a bit eroded, as you see in the photograph, but this is a photograph of, not a photograph, a drawing of the image done by an artist who consulted with, who was standing in front of the actual image itself. And as you can see, this is an image of an animal, but is it? Because if it is an animal, the animal seems to be standing in 2 feet and seems to have eyes unlike those of any animals. So the presumption is that this is not an image of an animal. This is an image of an individual that is dressed like an animal. Perhaps ethnographically, individuals dressing as animals has been attested during shamanistic rituals in a number of areas of the world. So the presumption is that this may be a picture of an actual individual, presumably some sort of a religious leader or some sort of a leader of some sort in an increasingly differentiated upper Paleolithic society. But again, the number of images that can be said to be human-like is, you can count them with the fingers of 2 hands. Look, for instance, this is again from Trois Frères Cave. Unlike most of the images in Europe are actually painted, but in some cases they are incised. And there is this palimpsest of images that have been incised one on top of the other. And one of the images in there is this one here, which is you blow it, is that one there. And again, you get this Bos primigenius, this ancient bull, which is not really a bull, is very clearly a human with inside the skin of a bull. The figure of the bull, of course, is directly associated with leadership. In the ancient Mesopotamian civilization, for instance, we have literature that talked about the king as the bull, and the main god Enlil as the bull of heaven. So the bulls are, wild bulls in particular, have, there's quite a bit of textual documentation suggesting that they are associated with some sort of leadership position. Again, more of these very otherwise very unusual. So again, I'm showing you a lot of these, not because they're particularly common, but because they're particularly uncommon. This one is coming from Chauvet Cave, and I'm showing you that because whereas Trois Frères Caves is one of the very latest, Chauvet is one of the very earliest. So this is a phenomenon that appears to be there throughout the Upper Paleolithic period, 40-something thousand BP to the end of the last glaciation, 14,000 BP, give or take. Bennett Bacon, a British historian, has published a couple of years ago an article in the Cambridge Journal of Archaeology, if I recall correctly. Don't quote me on that. An article of a couple of years ago. And he noticed, much as I told you that something like 15 or 20% of the images associated with weapons, and that has given rise to the idea of sympathetic magic, that these are desirable animals that hunters that are about to go out on a hunt are painting in order to ensure that their hunt will be successful. He has noticed that quite a number of the images have what he calls Y symbols, dots, and lines that you see here. But you see them right there, and in many cases they appear to associate with precise images. So there's this bull there, and there's all of these short lines there. There's that somewhat more abstract bull there with those markings right there. Sometimes the markings are inside the figure itself, and you see them both in incisions and painted. So what exactly are these images? Well, he has noticed, he essentially has collected every last piece of evidence that is known to him, and it should not surprise you that there's as I said, there's thousands upon thousands of these images, and this is there's a whole industry of Upper Paleolithic art history and archaeology. So most of these images have been thoroughly documented, so the database is very large indeed. And he has found that the number of dots or lines seem to vary according to the species being depicted. So there's some sort of a correlation between the particular species of animal and the number of dots. And he suggests that essentially the dots appear to be a visual indication of time, when exactly these species are going to be available over the landscape. So in a sense, they are a way to convey information. What exactly that information is he correct that this is essentially an indication that these bulls around here, they are going to be most plentiful in this particular season, as opposed to that particular season? Whether that information is correct, we do not know. That's only interpretation. That there is an association of these dots and lines and Ys with individual species, that is a statement of fact. Irrespective of whether Bacon is correct, that this is an indication of when these animals are going to be given birth and when they're going to be most plentiful, he's essentially interpreting them as instructions for hunters. The point I am trying to make is that whether he is correct or not, clearly, this is a mind that can deal with symbols, because dots are symbols for something else. He suggests that they're symbols for seasons, they're symbols for time. But this is a mind that can deal in symbols. And a mind that can deal in symbols is a modern, cognitively modern mind. That's the point I want to make, which is, of course, something that Mr. Klein had told us already. But in a sense, this would be the sort of evidence that suggests that Klein is indeed correct, that Upper Paleolithic period had minds that were cognitively modern. Our minds can deal with symbols. If we couldn't deal with symbols, we would not have a spoken language, for instance. This is very clear evidence that we are indeed dealing with a cognitively modern mind. The question still is open, however, whether that cognitive ability of dealing with symbols emerged dramatically in punctuated form 50,000 years ago, as Klein argues, or whether it is somewhat more evolve over a significantly greater period of time than that. I'll come back to that question in a second. But let me just continue with our tour of Upper Paleolithic art. And I am taking a lot longer than I expected with this. Most of the art is indeed painted, but occasionally there's some high relief art in the size of those caves again, and we're dealing again with animals. Some scholars have argued that the animals are not, again, indicating a mind that can deal in symbols, that the animals are not only representations of animals, but that they are actually representations of the societies themselves that produce the paintings. So some French art historians and anthropologists have suggested, for instance, that the felines, they have noticed that the felines tend to be pictures of felines in every case that they occur in a cave. They tend to be placed in the most inaccessible portions of the caves. farther deeper inside the caves, and they suggest that that means that the felines represent females. Others look at the very same data and suggest that the felines represent males. Who's right and who's wrong? Who knows? The point is that there's a method to the madness. The felines do occur in the most inaccessible portions of the cave regularly. That's a very clear pattern, and that is a pattern that has meaning. So the felines are a symbol. What exactly they're a symbol for? Are they truly a symbol of the female parts of society or the male parts of society? We do not know who's right or who's wrong, if perhaps neither. But what we do know is that again, these figures are not just animals, they are standing for something else. There is meaning behind the placement of dots, there's meaning behind the placement of figures themselves. Not every piece of art that emerges in this area is painting, although paintings are much. We have thousands upon thousands of these paintings, whereas particular figures of art that are in 3 dimensions are much smaller. This is a so-called Lowenmensch figure. And what is remarkable, that is quite early. It's been known since the 1930s. And essentially what it is depicting is, again, one of those figures that we saw in the paintings, something that looks like, that has the head of an animal, but the body of a human, that stands like a human. So what is what does it mean? What do you mean? What did they mean when they depicted a part animal, part human figure? Who was this? Who was being depicted? Again, we do not know, although the association, of course, in Mesopotamian art, lions are always associated with kings. The fact that this was so at 5,000 BC, does that mean that this was also so at 40,000 BC? Of course, the answer is it need not be so. But the association of lions as the king of nature and the association with leadership figures in society, there may be something there. Whether that is the case, whether that is correct here, I do not know. But that this is symbolic for something else, that I am quite sure indeed. And in the second you accept that point, you are accepting that these are people whose minds work the same way that our minds work. That is a point I want you to remember, but I'll come back to it at the beginning of the next class. Other figures, this one in ivory, the picture of a horse, a picture of a variety of animals done in ivory, in stone, and in terracotta, baked clay. The use of terracotta, which eventually will give you ceramics, appears already, about 24,000 BP. Females are very rarely depicted in Upper Paleolithic art. And when they are depicted, they're always depicted like the very famous Willendorf Venus with exaggerated sexual figures. What is the meaning of these figures? Is this some sort of a fertility amulet of some sort? Most of these figures appear to be pregnant. Is this the Playboy of the Upper Paleolithic times? We have no idea, other than to say that, again, these figures, the fact that they're always depicted with exaggerated sexual figures and in many cases with what appears to be depictions of pregnancy, clearly indicate that these are figures that are quite symbolic, they stand for something else. The ability to create an image that stands for something else and have that image be understood by both creator and the viewer, that implies a culture that is shared by that creator and that viewer, and a culture that can be reproduced. These are people that are not, whose minds work the way ours do, is the point I'm trying to make. Again, every time you see a female in this repertoire, it's always with these exaggerated figures. In terracotta, in ivory, and are we doing for time? We are out of time. Meanwhile, one of the most important things that Klein says is that this is a punctuated phenomenon. Alison Brooks and Sally McBrearty say Klein is entirely incorrect, and that Klein has not given a proper consideration to a whole variety of new data from Africa that seems to suggest that minds, cognitively human minds capable of using symbols, are already present in Africa long before they were present in Europe. And I'll start there. Next class. And I saw it this morning. Yeah, I'll get to it tonight or tomorrow at the latest.
Okay.
But I will certainly get back to you.
Yeah, no, thank you so much.